Well, welcome today. Let's let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. I'm Todd Fitzgerald. I'm Vice President of Cybersecurity Strategy for the Cybersecurity Collaborative at cyberleadersunite.com, where we bring together CISOs in a secure place, working on professional development, sharing strategic and tactical insights, and also providing advocacy for the CISO community. The hackers have banded together. The CISO community has to band together just as well. So I'm really honored today to have an esteemed panel. Each of these members, each of these CISOs are leading some very large organizations and are also on our executive committee. So we're very pleased to have them here today. So I'd like them to each introduce themselves. We'll start, how about you, Chris?
Hey, great, thanks, Todd. Chris Zell, the Vice President of Information Security for the Wendy's Company. I've been with Wendy's, it'll be 4 years on Saturday, actually, and 22 years in the U.S. Air Force, cyber information security the whole time. So I've been doing this for quite some time. I'm glad to be part of the Cybersecurity Collaborative. Try to get involved in giving back. Also able to lead the Wendy's Veterans and Employee Resource Group. So very passionate about DE&I initiative. So glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. And next we have Meredith Harper.
Thank you so much, Todd. I'm Meredith Harper, the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Eli Lilly and Company. And I've been with Eli Lilly for 2.5 years, so I'm relatively a newbie there, but have about 27 years of experience in pretty much all things health IT, from privacy to security, risk, compliance, audit, and application development when I was at that stage in my career. So I'm glad to be here. DEI is, what I live and breathe, and I love this stuff. So I'm really excited about getting into the conversation today. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here, Meredith. And last but not least, Sydney.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sydney Klein, the Chief Information Security Officer at Bristol Myers Squibb. We're a global biopharmaceutical, and I think like Chris and Meredith here, am somewhat of a newbie still, 3 years at BMS. Beyond my responsibilities in cybersecurity, I also get the privilege of serving on our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council, which is chaired by our CEO. I sponsor our IT D&I Council and am the local chapter sponsor for our Pride Alliance, which is our LGBTQ plus community.
Well, great to have you here, and let's get into the conversation. Just to kind of frame this up, Blacks and Hispanics are not gaming on whites when it comes to college education over the past 10 years. This is a significant problem if companies continue to require 4-year degrees. According to the US Census Bureau, in 2019, 40.1% of non-Hispanic whites aged 25 and older had a bachelor's degree or higher, up from 33.2% in 2010. During the same period, the percentage of Blacks aged 25 and older with a bachelor's degree or higher rose from 19.8% to 26.1%. Asians are from 52.4% to 58.1%, and Hispanics from 13.9% to 18.8%. There's also some disparities in the STEM deployment by sex, race, and Hispanic origin. Blacks and Hispanics have consistently been underrepresented in the STEM employment. In 2011, 11% of the workforce was Black, while 6% of STEM workers were Black, up from 2% in 1970. Although the Hispanic share of the workforce has increased significantly from 3% in 1970 to 15% in 2011, Hispanics were 7% of the STEM workforce in 2011. So we clearly have some disparity here in the workforce. And before we get into these issues, maybe it would be instructive to, we throw these words around, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe if you could give your definitions of what those things mean to you.
Sure. I guess I'll start us off. And from a diversity perspective, the way I define that is we all come to the table with different skills and talents and ways of life, and socializations are different. So the diversity means for me that we all come in various ways to contribute to our organizations. In terms of equity, I'm thinking more so in terms of how we are all treated. Are we treating every population of team members the same way when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to roles, advancement, training, awareness, certifications, things of that nature? We want to make sure that everyone is treated the same. And when I start to think about inclusion, that is taken on the perspective for me is we all matter. Like, so our voices in the industry, on the team, they matter. And so we have to find ways to continuously allow people to voice what they feel and what their perspectives are and include them into the solutioning that we're all working towards as a company. So that's the way that I kind of term it in my head when I'm walking through those three areas.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. So equity, I think of that as fairness without bias or favoritism. And when I'm thinking about the concepts of diversity and inclusion, I'll throw another one in there, which is belonging. And I think that really has a place in the conversation. So these are not my words, but they're words that I love, that diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, and belonging is dancing like nobody's watching. And so for me, I think really the goal is that your whole workforce, your whole team will really feel that sense of belonging, that they can be themselves regardless of where they are.
Yeah, I love all that. And, before I begin, let me address the middle-aged white guy in the room, right? I've done a lot of these and gotten some feedback before, like, hey, why is this middle-aged white guy having discussions around diversity and inclusion?
There's nothing right. Are you saying something about middle age versus older age?
No, absolutely not. But, I think when we talk about diversity, I look at diversity of thought, right? And when you kind of dig a little bit deeper into my background, my wife is born and raised in Germany, foreign citizen. One of my children is biracial. Another one of my children is a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm myself a disabled veteran. I've lived all over the world, and I've seen the power and the enrichment that can be derived from diversity, equity, inclusion. And when I think about a lot of the education that still needs to be done out there, it's to people like me. And if I can use this platform to be someone to say, hey, look, let me talk to more cyber leaders. Let me talk to hiring managers. Let me talk about the issues and some of the opportunities. So that's why I like to get involved in some of these discussions. Diversity of thought, right? And again, that might not match up with kind of the mainstream definition of that, but diverse backgrounds, cultures, experiences, perceptions, communities, as well as your faith, ethnicity, and gender identification. That's how we enrich our culture within our organizations. Just like the others, equity, impartial and fair treatment of all people, regardless of those diversity items that I just discussed. And in my mind, inclusion is really about cultivating an environment where everyone has equal opportunity, equal footing, equal voice, and really feels comfortable being them true selves in their work environments. So love to have heard the answers from Sydney and Meredith, and it sounds like we're all kind of playing off the same sheet of music. So
Definitely. I love that diversity of thought. I've talked about that before. I think sometimes we get ourselves in a hole and only want to look at it from race and gender and things of that nature, but it's really much broader than that. Our socializations bring skills to the table. How do we leverage that to be the best that we can as a team? So I love the fact that you included the thought piece.
Fascinating. And I think, I really like the analogy about, being asked to dance. And,
Definitely.
it's kind of, what brought us to here, right? We've had organizations lay out the party, and then, but what takes us to those next steps? And Chris, you talked about, diversity, diversity of thought. But also you have an interesting background in your own coming out of the military, and into the workplace. And how did you find, that you made that transition?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting um, proposition for me. 22 years total service, 12 years active duty. When I left 12 years of active duty, I did not yet have a degree. I didn't have any certifications, and trying to find a position with a corporate company was tough. I wasn't able to. Even though I'd had 12 years of kind of building, securing, and protecting some of the most critical networks and systems from some of the best bad guys out there, I was passed over many times because I didn't have those degrees. So I feel like when we talk about, other than diversity of thought, other than hiring, minorities and women, there's a connection there into what else does diversity mean? What other backgrounds? Veterans, members of the LGBTQ community, like we've talked about, even differently abled and neurodiverse. So these are folks, autism spectrum, Asperger's, who bring a lot of great experiences and backgrounds to our communities. Even thinking about formerly incarcerated and troubled youth, right? These are all people, when we talk about the diversity of thought, these are some of the things that hiring managers should be looking at. And I've said before, the college degree requirements, and we'll probably touch on this a little bit more. I did end up getting my degree years later, but what I've done as I've achieved my leadership roles ever since as a hiring manager, I've removed all requirements for college degrees. I made a post on LinkedIn a few weeks back about this, in fact, and got over 100 replies, mostly supportive. But I got a few private messages also supporting me. But these folks were afraid to actually voice that support in public, right? Which was kind of interesting. So, I'm going to work with them and help to encourage them to bring that same kind of collective voice to the community. I think as leaders, we have the power to be able to do that. So.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that, Chris. I think it's such an important aspect. The metrics that Todd gave us at the top of our hour show the amount of people that you're discounting before you even get the opportunity to bring them into your recruiting process. I too haven't put a college degree as a requirement on my job descriptions for 15 years. And I think that diversity of thought that you bring up is really important as well. And there's a beautiful figure that you can find online, search for it, the diversity iceberg. And that concept that there are a lot of things that we can see. I will say that those things that we think we can see are actually becoming harder for us to judge with our eyes. So we need to be really cautious of judging with our eyes. There's so much that's underneath that iceberg. It is our background. It's the way that we were raised. It's whether or not we were in rural areas versus big city areas. That diversity is really important. And so to your points, Chris, as a hiring manager, I really think that our job is to look at what we're missing on the team, what perspective, what background, what skill set do we maybe need versus saying, oh, I want another one of so-and-so who's so great on the team. What are you actually missing that would be the best complement to the team?
And I think just to add one more thing to that, as we're looking at our job descriptions and we're deciding whether to place it on there or not, I think that we also have to partner a little bit tighter with our HR teams, because when we go through the cycle of leveling those particular job descriptions, they're doing it sometimes off of data that requires that degree that puts that job description and that role within a specific bracket. And so you also don't want to make sure that the folks that are going into those roles are at a disadvantage from a comp perspective because they were not judged and leveled against the right type of roles. So we have to partner tighter with our HR teams to do that better.
Yeah,
And I've heard of places that have been taking, retail, some of the retail establishments that have been giving aptitude tests to their workers and saying, we're going to put you through several months of training. And when you come out of this, you'll start out as a cybersecurity analyst. But at that point, your salary will then double. And then you can have that extra income and possibly the ability then to get that college degree next, and change the actual sequence of the way that we look at this. If we look at the US job statistics, it came out last year that the largest growth area for US Census jobs between now and 2028 was information security analysts. And so that tells us we have to be really strongly looking at these barriers, and we're putting in this bias of a whole population that we're not tapping into by not being able to by putting that college degree requirement out there.
You know, I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk, right? Occupy Mars, right? And there's a great video of him out there where he talks about, you know, one of the most critical mistakes he's made in the past as a hiring manager, and it was hiring strictly for the kind of technical capabilities or their credentials, right? And he, after thinking about it for a while and seeing some of those kind of fallacies, you know, he said, look, what I've missed was, how can people make other people better, right? How does this individual have the ability, or do they have the ability to make others around them better, right? And it was very analogous to kind of a sports team. Not everyone has to be your star goal shooter. Not everyone has to be the quarterback, right? You can't be successful all by yourself. And so instead of just looking for those highly credentialed, you know, technical and educational backgrounds, you know, look at the personalities, look at the potential, look at the interest, the inquisitiveness, the motivation, and those are the things that, you know, if Elon Musk believes those are important, I think we should all probably, you know, kind of follow suit and pay attention as well. So,
And I think we have such a hard time in interviewing for potential. Our interview guides that your talent acquisition HR teams are producing are probably based on, what have you done? Tell me about a time when. And so to the point on making sure that you're really building that job requirement for what it needs to be, how are you actually having an interview that allows you to see that potential, and how, to your point, you're going to have that person bring out the best in others?
Absolutely. And to that point, Meredith, our hiring managers and HR, are we expecting too much in those job requirements? And particularly when we're looking at women and minorities, our job descriptions, are they right?
You know, I think right is relative to the person, but when it comes to my experience, I think that we have overemphasized certain things in certain jobs to weed out candidates, not understanding that some of what we're layering into the job descriptions are really based in our bias. And we don't really think about how that's going to limit the pool of individuals that would be comfortable going after this particular role. So I think that we can do better there in terms of balancing that out. Again, especially when you're thinking about women and in some instances minorities, we take a look at those job descriptions and we look at all of the required things that we have to do. It's 10 things on the list. If we don't have number 10, we won't go after that job. So we'll let the job description go and just won't even go after it, because we feel that we have to meet every set of criteria. So what I try to do when I'm building those JDs is to look at the absolute requirements. Like, some of the things we put in there are not absolute, and they can get it over a period of time. They can go through some sort of training program that you can offer on the back end that will give you the same level of value as if they were coming in the door with it. So what are those absolute things that you need to put in there? And I think that if we can get ourselves thinking that way, we will open the pool up to some individuals that will discount themselves just because of what they see on paper.
yeah, that's, you know, Meredith, it's great that you mentioned that, and there actually is data to support that, right? There was this LinkedIn Gender Report 2019 that basically showed that white males will apply for a job after they meet about 60% of the criteria, right? Whereas women feel like they need to meet 100%. And I've seen this with my wife. So my wife is Chief Operations Officer for a technology company, works in the cyber field, and I've seen her go through that, right? But for men, we're like, we can figure it out, right? We'll figure it out. But here's the uplifting part of that report, but it also shows we have some work to do. That same study showed that when women do apply, they're 16% more likely to get hired, right? And then jumps to 18% when they're senior roles. And so we believe this is because women really vet themselves so thoroughly before they actually apply. But there's also an issue where they realize that recruiters are about 13% less to reach out and send an email to a female on LinkedIn after viewing their profile. So it does show that there's some recruiter bias as well. So there's definitely some wood to chop in both areas. So this is something that we really need to face head on.
And I think
I
it goes
didn't know
back
he
to
had
our,
to, sorry, I didn't know he had to have 60% to apply for a job. I didn't know the bar was that high. No, go ahead, Meredith.
so we have to go back to our socialization as well. So I just think growing up as an African-American kid, we were socialized to understand that we have to come in at a higher level than our counterparts on every plane, because we are being judged differently in certain instances. And so I walk into that scenario saying, how can I eliminate this narrative that this Meredith doesn't have this? Well, how about I'm going to get a degree in that? I'm going to have a certification in this. I come to the table with all of these things that I think will eliminate any narrative that would put me in a position where someone would say, we're not going to give her that job. I think women think a lot like that too. We want to, not that men don't put their best foot forward, but we want to do this successfully at the same time. We're trying to juggle life and families and husbands and wives and all of that. Like, we're trying to juggle all of these things. So we want to make sure that if we do step forward for that role, that we won't be put in a position where we will fail. And then the narrative becomes, see what we did? We gave that woman an opportunity. She failed. So therefore, we probably shouldn't entertain women anymore. So I think that's the same for minorities. There's a weight that goes with that. There's a weight that comes in the door when I apply for something. I don't have the luxury to feel like I can fail in this. So I'm going to come armed to the teeth with experience and opportunities and all of that, because I want to make sure that I'm not going to get into something that will now create a pattern where they'll say, I'm not going to hire anybody else because look at what happened. We tried it once, it didn't work. So let's move on to someone else.
Yeah,
Do you
Todd, if I
think the
may,
list?
I want to
Go ahead.
add one
Go
point
ahead.
here, which is I think,
Absolutely.
Meredith, I hear that imposter syndrome kind of concept in what you're saying. And
Yes.
I think that the role of sponsors and mentors plays so well here, because we can do a lot on the job description side, but we're still going to need people to encourage folks who wouldn't think that they're quite qualified for it. And so we have to play a role in that side as well. And so from a hiring manager perspective, maybe it's tapping into your network and figuring out, hey, who would really be good that doesn't actually know that they would really be good. But then within your own team, how do you populate ideas that perhaps seem beyond that person's wildest dreams?
I agree. I love it. Love it.
Absolutely. And so do you think some of these job descriptions are like when they list out all these roles and responsibilities, that's just seen as adding a lot more work? And how am I going to balance that with my family? Is it looked at differently um, if you're a woman?
With my women team members, I think it has come into play when they're assessing a promotion or a role. For me, I don't have children, so that was a area that I didn't have to balance in my career. I had to balance a husband, but that was it. So I was able to take chances that others probably couldn't take. I could travel when they couldn't, things like that. So I think it does come into play when you see all of the requirements that have to be met, and how do you do that, still feel fulfilled in a role, and then still make sure you're keeping up with your home commitments. So I think it is something that comes into play, at least from what I've seen. You're right, Sydney, when it comes to the sponsorship and the encouragement, I have found myself over the years, trying to tell people, listen, I'm willing to take a chance on you, because we do it all the time. We take chances on people all the time. I'm willing to take a chance on you. Let's talk about how we can support you in this. So if we're going to move you into this role, I am prepared to give you a sponsor. Let's talk about that. We typically don't always give women sponsors in some of these roles. And so they don't have someone that can help them guide them through their career. So I have to have that conversation and say, listen, you got this, you can do this. I'm going to give you support so you can move through it. You can still have the work-life balance that you want and still feel satisfied in the end. So I think we have to do more, to your point, Sydney, as it relates to the sponsorship piece, if we're going to encourage someone to take that leap.
And I think there's still this bias that we have to fight in a lot of organizations. for me, half of my direct report leadership team are female. And, it's one of those things where if a male makes a decision in a meeting and he comes across as being kind of harsh, they're like, oh, he's steadfast and resolute. But if a female does something similar, like, oh, she's difficult to work with, right?
Yeah.
Or if I come across like hot-headed in a meeting, for a woman, they might say, oh, she's emotional, right?
Or
We have,
angry. I'm
or
angry.
angry. Oh yeah, she
Yeah,
gets
I'm
angry.
angry.
She gets emotional.
Yeah, most of the
Like
time.
we have to fight that. And as a mentor, as a sponsor, it's incumbent on me as a leader to make sure that, I understand that those biases exist. I empathize with them. Again, my wife is in the industry, and so I hear from her and her experiences, and then of course my own leadership team. So I can't experience it myself, but again, I try to evangelize and champion for my teams. And again, those are some of the biases that we have to continue to kind of take, challenge within our own companies.
Yeah. And I've had to step in and have those conversations. I have a quick little story here. I was actually on a technical call. This was several years back, and I was probably the most senior person on the call. I was the only woman on the call. And this was one of our very highly technical teams. And we were discussing something. And one of the gentlemen on the call kept calling me honey and sweetie through the whole call. I mean, just honey and sweetie. And I kept trying to say to myself, like, how do I address this? Like, I'm in the middle of this meeting. I can't really blow up, but I need to be able to address this, because if that's the way you see, and at the time I was a vice president. So I'm a vice president sitting on this call. You're not a vice president, not that we're talking about hierarchy, but you feel so comfortable in this male dominated space that you feel like you can call me honey and sweetie. So we did have to have a come to Jesus conversation around what's acceptable and what's not just with me, but think about what any woman would feel in an instance like that, where you're relegated to be the honey and the sweetie on the call. Who wants to do that? That's not what we're here for. So I think you're right. We have to call those things out. I had to call it out, and I did it in private, but we still have to call those things out.
So please submit your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can while we're in a few minutes. So these job descriptions that we have out there, are there, should we be wording those differently for different genders? Does that make a difference, or do you think that doesn't make a difference? I guess I'm thinking more of Sydney and Meredith here.
Yeah, I think that we need to be thoughtful in our words. There are definitely some tools and technologies out there that will help you eliminate bias within a job description. I think that one thing is we don't necessarily want to be all classified just by our gender. So it's not necessarily about gender words, but it is about words that could be a little bit biased. I know the first time I became exposed to some of these tools, I was told that women don't like the word superstar, and I thought, never thought of it. Don't really have an issue with it, but okay, I won't put it in my job descriptions. I think really you want them to be neutral, and you want them to come across as the principles in which you want your workforce to maintain, the type of culture that you have at the company, which is hopefully one that values diversity and will seek to provide equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that really is your chance to tell the potential applicants about who you are as a company and what you value. And so if you're putting value words in there that are very abrupt, that are perhaps negative, are too competitive of a culture, you're probably going to sway away a good diverse population. So I would consider to look at those companies.
Meredith, any additional thoughts on that?
No, Sydney said it perfectly. I don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, I'll add, it was kind of interesting because something that I learned from my 19-year-old who's actually interested in cyber, and will likely start a boot camp later next month at UNC Charlotte. His friends were having a difficult time kind of understanding the cyber and information security realm and the jargon that we use. And he even found it kind of difficult to convey to them, what we do sometimes in a way that doesn't sound like we're associated with being government, law enforcement, It's like I was trying to think about, some of the job descriptions, some of the requirements, instead of writing something like, defend against nation state threat actors, techniques, tactics, and procedures, from exfiltrating and exploiting, blah, blah, blah. I was like, how can I, because that, unless you're in the industry, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to you. So like, yeah, you could kind of soften that, so to speak, and write, well, you'll work together as a part of a team to help ensure the safety of your company's information. That's something that I think would convey. And, I think this transcends just kind of female minority, but as we also think about the next generation of cyber analysts and folks coming into our career field, honestly, I think that it does carry a negative connotation sometimes to the word security itself. It is a impactful, meaningful word into some communities. The word security doesn't necessarily carry a positive connotation. So it was interesting that, my own 19-year-old was bringing some of this to me, saying, how can I explain to them in a way that doesn't sound like I'm joining the CIA, right? Or something like that. So just another, kind of piece of the puzzle here.
It's very good perspective. And I think, we do have that imagery issue with, people in hoodies sitting at a monitor, looking at cyber threats. And that's not going to appeal to a large percentage of the population. And there was a great article today in the Chicago Tribune, and it was talking about STEM careers. And a very similar problem, where over 50% of the workforce is actually female. Yet in the STEM careers, it was less than 30% of women. And these two women have started this initiative to bring girls into physics and into nuclear engineering. And the article was talking about, you don't have to be Einstein to be in science. And I think, it's a very similar, we need to make it cool for kids and girls and minorities to come into this field. So how do you suggest that we, what sort of activities can our organizations do to help promote, to bring people in at a younger age?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about reminds me of the concept of the leaky pipeline. So specific to gender, there is a ton of research on the ages in which girls start to believe in themselves less and start to leak out of a system that would pursue some sort of career in STEM. 5 years old is where it starts, and it gets progressively worse as you go on. And it even happens once you're already in that career. So there's data that suggests that a lot of women, when they get to kind of that director level within their careers, they leave IT. Maybe it's the demands of the fact that, especially for us in cybersecurity, it is not a 9 to 5 job. It is always on. And so how do you have an environment that allows for people to be able to commit to the job, but not necessarily commit to those night shifts if that's not within their personal commitments and obligations? I think it is really something that we can do in everything. It's from the TV shows that show up. It's from saying you run like a girl and making that a good thing. And I think that there are so many good consumer product companies that have really made an effort in their advertising. I think even in a media that we see through television shows, the concept of making it cool, making it good, and making it something that really should appeal and is accessible to all genders is incredibly key. And it starts from the moment you begin raising this child. And so getting into school programs, giving back to the community. Chris, I know you're involved in a number of things that give back to the community, and getting them at that younger age so they don't become victims to that leaky pipeline.
This is why I love Sydney. She's awesome, right? I think that I agree with that. We have to get to those populations earlier than what we've been targeting. I've seen a couple of organizations that were IT focused, STEM focused, women focused, but they only dealt at the college level. So you were either interning through their organization or something to that effect. And I'm saying, well, what happens to that third, fourth, fifth grade grader that needs to see people who look like them in these spaces? And you're missing that whole demographic because you're just focusing right on the what you consider to be your immediate pipeline. So I think that we have to think further down the road of exposure for those kids. One of the things that I was able to be a part of when I was living in Michigan is we actually did have an organization called the Michigan Council of Women in Technology. And so we were about 1,000 women across the state of Michigan. And we had programs that went all the way down into elementary school, where we're offering tech camps over the summer. And all of your mentors during that tech camps, they're women and they're minorities and all of that. And so we were able to get to those kids much sooner to show them what the possibilities were. And then again, what we found as we did a little bit of our research is that if we did not touch that young girl by the time she hit the fifth grade, then she will never select a STEM career. So that's telling us that we can't wait until college. We have to go back to elementary school and start to offer that exposure. And then when you layer on the disparities that we see within some of our cities, where you see technology not being readily available in the inner city, something as basic and simple as Wi-Fi is not even there. So I think that we have to do better at how we're engaging with those schools that house that underrepresented population, whether they're minority, whether they're girls. We have to really focus differently. It has to be well beyond that. The last thing I would probably say is around socialization. And now Chris brought up the idea of socialization at the beginning of the conversation, but it's something that I think we always have to keep in mind. We are socializing our kids differently when it comes to the way we socialize little boys and the way we socialize little girls. And this field is not easy. It's not easy. What we do is really challenging. But if you think back to some of the things that probably happened to some of you, like it did for me when I was a kid, we have a boy, he fails at something, he starts to cry. And then what do we say to him? Boys don't cry, get back up on the horse, you can do it. You give them this pep talk. We have a same girl who has the same failure and she starts to cry. What do? Oh, honey, come here. Let me give you a hug. It's going to be okay. And we kind of coddle them into that. So that grit that's needed to be built in our children, sometimes we're missing that opportunity, which really will help them as they decide to select something like a STEM career, which can be challenging, honestly. My belief.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with both Sydney and Meredith. And, we do spend a lot of time and a lot of cycles trying to get folks involved into our community who are probably, entry level and into, even mid-career. My wife, Kirsten, and I, both founding members of the Columbus chapter of the ICMCP, it's the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals. Kirsten, along with a few other leaders from the Columbus area, also created a nonprofit here in the Midwest called Empower Women of InfoSec. Over the past year, they raised over $50,000 for scholarships and training for women who are transitioning into cyber. But you're right, there is an untapped kind of area in that K through 12. I'm also on the state of Ohio Cyber Advisory Board, where we advise the state CIO, the lieutenant governor, and the CISO on all things cyber. And we did find that in the 2018-2019 school year, around 42% of the state of Ohio high schools actually taught computer science. And it was even less when you get into kind of the kindergarten through ninth grade. So we're working to change that. There has been funding that's been approved to allow teachers to become credentialed in computer science. And there are additional policies that are either in draft or have been approved around things like allowing computer science classes to count as graduation courses and even college level courses. And to Meredith's point around access to technology and Wi-Fi, certainly there is a disparity when it comes to racial and ethnic background who have access to those technologies. So the state of Ohio is also working on kind of eliminating some of that barrier and gap as well. So.
Yeah, excellent groups to be involved in. I want to flip now. These are great groups outside of the company to help bring the pipeline in. But let's shift gears just a little bit and look at, what about inside our companies in terms of return on investment? Because it's always that follow the money, right? That's what drives a lot of decisions today. And Sydney, maybe you can kick us off here. Is this good for ROI or bad for ROI or um,
Yeah.
neutral?
I think it's incredibly good for ROI. There's so much data behind this that teams that are diverse and inclusive perform better. And I think that that's really the key, right? You can't just have the diversity and you can't just have one person who is whatever that diversity element brings to the table. You have to have a truly diverse team that feels a sense of inclusion, but also this sense of belonging. So I'll read you all a few statistics I found. Employees who feel included are 20 times more engaged. I think engagement breeds greater productivity, it breeds greater loyalty to the company, and I think more imagination and innovation because you feel a bit of safety in doing that. Diverse and inclusive teams see as much as an 80% increase in innovation, and diverse and inclusive teams see over a 40% increase in collaboration. It is so important that when you hire, and hopefully you're hiring diverse, your job doesn't stop there, right? You need to make sure that you're retaining and investing in your talent. I think that you want to invest in your talent because if you don't, then you're not going to have the new skills that you need on your team. And that includes a number of things. Sure, it's the technical skills, but it's also the leadership skills. And I know many companies have people or business resource groups. We have people and business resource groups is what we call them. And I love the model that we have at the company because not only is it about connecting people who might have similar backgrounds or people who want to be a voice for that particular community, it's about building leadership opportunities for people who want to take on management, but you have to start somewhere. There are great leadership opportunities that exist in these PBRGs. It's also at my company about the business aspect as well. And this is something that I haven't found everywhere, but I would really encourage your companies to think about how do you move beyond the creating the inclusive environment with these people business groups and really make it about the business aspect as well. So Meredith and I have a lot in common in our industry. The things that we're trying to tackle are diversity in clinical trials. It's understanding the needs of the communities that we serve. And there's so much value to have in a people and business resource group. Our bold business resource group which is Black organizational leadership development was really involved very early on in the days of COVID, trying to understand why there were communities that were so unjustly impacted and bringing service to those communities. We've done a lot of research that says that the gay community is so much harder hit by certain disease types. Why is that? And why do medical professionals not understand the differences in the treatment that is needed? And so there's so much value, no matter what your business is, to bringing that diverse value and perspective to what you do for your business. That is an untapped potential that I'm sure a lot of companies are not doing yet. And I think that you can get behind it. And now I think what our country has been woken up to is the work that we have to do still for equity. And I think that companies are putting their money where their words are. I'm really proud that my company is part of that. And I would encourage you all to get a voice at that table with your company. Look to understand how can you invest, whether it's through minority owned businesses, whether it's through increasing your diversity of your own workforce, if it's through equity in the promotions that you give. I think that that's a really important piece. And I'm sure that all of you on the phone have a voice that needs to be shared.
Yeah, that's all amazing. And, there's a lot of correlation between what Sydney talked about and what I'm lucky enough to be able to see at Wendy's. We do have the construct of the employee kind of networking social groups, but we've really pulled them under the entire senior leadership team. And these affinity groups really come together and provide diverse but common voice to the entire leadership team, right? Our Black Employee Resource Group, of course, I lead the Veteran Resource Group, Women of Wendy's, WenGen, which is a group of our younger leaders within the organization, our Cultural Diversity Network, and our We Qual, which is supportive of the LGBTQ plus communities. We all come together. We all share the same goals of making our organization more diverse, inclusive, equitable. And we love the idea that our CEO and his staff leverage us to help make decisions for the organization. It's people first. And I think what's important is companies should really reflect their audience and their customers. Right. I think customers want to be able to know that they can identify with the brands that they support. So when you go up to a counter or you're ordering something on the phone or online, you want to know that there's someone just like you on the other side. It's so much more than, do you sell a great product? Do you sell a great burger? You want to make sure that that organization today really aligns with you and your values and who you are as an organization.
Of course, I don't have a ton to add here, but I think the biggest piece is having access to your leadership, your executive committees, and letting them leverage you as they're solutioning to determine how we're going to handle something. And I know we had an opportunity to do that at Lilly. Our CEO has been very energized around the whole topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and has reached out to these employee resource groups to hear more about what are we missing, if anything. How do we refocus ourselves in spaces that are tangible? And I think that's the I guess word I want us to land on, because we've been having these conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion in some shape, form, or fashion for years. We've known that it's been a problem, but we haven't always been able to capture that as an industry in a way that it creates tangible results for us. So I'm now seeing companies, including Lilly, being very definitive in how we're going to address those things. We have a population of 10% of our employees are Black employees. Within the next couple of years, we're going to make sure that we're at 13%, which actually is a reflection of the population across the country. Things like that. Like, it has to be definitive, actionable things. And then that's where you can engage that ERG to help move those initiatives forward and ensuring that we're actually seeing those gains. So again, I think we're kind of all aligned in our organizations and tackling it similarly together.
I think that's great. That we're tying this into the business, and I've seen some reports recently of some companies that are looking at not investing in organizations that do not have minority representation on their board.
Yeah.
And this is where we start to see these sorts of changes. So what I'd like to do now is flip to, we'll answer some questions. I see we have a lot of them. I know we won't get through all of them. But while we're doing that, we have 3 poll questions that we would like everybody to answer, but we're going to keep continuing answering the questions. So Alex, if you could put up the first poll question. And while everybody's answering those poll questions, which we would really appreciate, I have a question here which really dovetails off of the last comment by Meredith, and maybe Sydney and Chris, you have some perspective on this as well. What metrics are organizations using to move the needle in this area, and how do we really measure the improvement? Any ideas on that?
Go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, I think Meredith, you just said it right. Being a reflection of the society that we're a part of is a great place to start. I think that you have to have goals. You have to understand what your goal is, or you're not going to be able to make progress. But the very first step is understanding where you are and owning it, right? And once you know where you are, then you can get a plan for where you want to be. So Meredith, I love that you said representing the society.
That's correct. And I think, tying this also to what you would consider to be a leadership requirement. I can't lead successfully at Lilly if I'm not embracing DEI. That is a part of who we are as a culture. And so we are in a position where we have aspirational goals every year that's offered to us to say, okay, leader Meredith, Here are our aspirational goals as it relates to the demographics that we see across our organization. How are you faring in your particular area, in your span of control? So that's something that we really judge ourselves against at the end of the year. Do we really meet those aspirational goals as it relates to the number of targeted resources in those specific spaces? I think that's really important. Again, I think the messaging has to be consistent with, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remove that. Okay, I think the messaging has to be consistent with also what are you doing outside of your organization as well. So I think that, yes, we can do metrics in the inside and we can start to build up our teams that way, but how are we also engaging externally to our organizations? Again, that's the pipeline piece. How are we pulling those people into our organization? How are we wrapping the right level of support around them? And then the metric becomes, are they a long-termer, a long-timer? Are they going to be here with us for a while? And once they're here, are they going to get the opportunities to move up the ladder? So that's kind of a longer metric that you have to look at. But really, how do we get them in the door? How do we keep them? And how do we retain them over a period of time is something that we also take a look at as well.
Yeah, I haven't seen any company kind of tackle this incredibly well yet, but we've been talking about all of the things that diversity means, right? So one day I hope that we get to this concept that it's more, I saw one of the Q&A questions came out that reminded me of ageism and the concerns that we have there. So where are we going to be able to go with the full aspect of diversity, those things that you can see, those things that you probably wrongly assume, and those things that you really can't see? I think that the industry as a whole is very early days on that, but I think that we'll get there.
So you were actually reading the next question I really wanted to bring up, Sydney. So you're always one step ahead, Sydney. I see that. How can an over age 50 plus female with IT experience, education, now transition to the current IT or cybersecurity after taking a break from the field? I mean, this question just loads everything into this.
I can jump in. For me, my advice would be to network. I think that when I think about some of the candidates that have been placed before me, it's been because of some of my great networking relationships where someone is partnering with you to connect you to their network to see if there's an opportunity to open up that door for you to move into that organization. So I think the networking piece cannot be underestimated. Because you not only get the access to what their network might have, but you also get the built-in cheerleader because this person knows you and they are able to talk to their colleagues and their counterparts about what you can bring to the table and that you'll be a great asset. So I'm just going to go back to the old adage, networking works, and we need to be able to continue to incorporate that in.
Yeah, and I'll pile on really quickly because I think this is super important. You know, I've been a hiring manager for many years and trying to be very objective and non-biased, not looking at age, not looking at gender, not looking at anything like that. You know, what I tell folks who are interested in transitioning into cyber, regardless of your background, regardless of your age, network, Meredith, great, number one, like that is what it is. Finding a mentor, like reaching out and finding a mentor. I've got probably 4 or 5 people on LinkedIn right now who reached out to me kind of out of the blue. Hey, I'm transitioning from the service. I'm transitioning careers. Would you mind spending 30 minutes, 60 minutes with me? I love to do that. I do that as much as I can. Self-study is huge, right? For individuals who I've interviewed that said, you know what, I'm not allowed to do this in my day job, but let me tell you about the lab that I built at home. Let me tell you about how I built my TAC box with Kali. Let me tell you about how I learned how the pfSense firewall works. And then finally get involved with meetups and organizations. The ICMCP is a great organization. ISC squared, if you have local DEF CONs, B-sides, I can probably name a half a dozen people off the top of my head in the Columbus area who have been hired through that networking and getting involved in some of those organizations, even as a volunteer. Let me help set up for your event. You start to build that relationship, and that's when some of those opportunities can open up.
So a follow-up question to this, as we look at, you know, different personalities, so not just, you know, with race and you know, gender, ethnicity, but we look at different behavioral preferences of individuals. And I guess what I'm talking about here is, It's said that, a lot of IT people are very introverted, or don't want to be around all these other people. And so now we're saying, go to these events and get engaged with those. Is there another way? Is there any recommendations that we would give for that part of the population to actually bring them into the groove?
I think for me, it's a muscle that we have to continuously exercise. I don't necessarily consider myself to be an extrovert. I'm probably an introvert with extroverted tendencies. And I've learned over the years to flex my extroverted nature when necessary, but I can be perfectly okay at home by myself, not talking to anybody for long periods of time. So I wish I could say that there are other avenues that will get you down this road without interacting with people, but unfortunately, you're going to have to get comfortable with that part of yourself and then figure out how to flex it enough that it doesn't exhaust you to death, but you at least get the value out of your time when you choose to flex it. And that's what I've learned to do over the years. And then I might have to sit down for 2 hours and regroup. But the point is, I do it when I have to. So I would still encourage people to just push yourself if you can. And again, if you have a really good mentor, they'll know that about you. So they'll continue to kind of help you move an inch further where you get more comfortable doing it. And they can be your advocate as well with those individuals that they may pair you up with, and may give that person some tools to say, listen, I know this person personally. Here are some areas where I think they're going to need some development. So if you choose to bring them in, I will still partner with them, but you're going to have to kind of focus on these 2 or 3 things to help them develop over time. Would be the way that I would handle it. Being an introvert with extroverted tendencies, I would do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I get nervous when I hear the word network. It makes me kind of want to hide a little bit, to be honest. And I think so many of us are introverts. I'll put myself in that club as well. It helped me to not think of it so much as networking, but as learning that I might want to meet this person because they know how to do something that I'm interested in really well. And when I got advice early on in my career that I should network or I should meet people, it was very unnatural for me because I would like show up and think that magically the conversation would just happen. And what I realized is if I went in there with like one question, like, you are really good at presenting in a meeting. How did you get that way? Can we talk about that? Or you really understand, how to be a forensic specialist in cybersecurity. How did you get there? Like, what's the coolest project you ever worked on? Those to me were more achievable, and I think starting smaller group and kind of working your way up might be one way to kind of allow yourself to be that introvert, but still connect with people.
Very good. And excellent conversation. I think we made it, very clear today that we really need all these skills in the organization. It's not just the technical skills. I know we had a question about the technical skills in there, but we need this diversity across the organization to really be better for our organizations and to have happier people. I mean, right? It's not just about making money. It's about people coming to their job, like Sydney said, to be engaged, 20 times greater engagement, I think is fantastic. So I want to thank our panelists today. I know we're at the top of the hour, want to be respectful of everybody's time. Uh, Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and let's continue this journey forward. Thank you very much, everybody.
So.
Great. Thank you.